The red warning light on the instrument panel flashed, slicing through the darkness at exactly 8:13 p.m. A heavy, unnatural silence hung in the cramped cockpit, broken only by the strained, groaning roar of the jet engines. The captain felt the multi-ton machine suddenly shudder. The yoke grew momentarily heavy in his sweating hands, and the nose of the plane pitched upward on its own. The fuselage's center of gravity had shifted violently. Beyond the thin cockpit glass, a freezing storm raged, zero visibility and a piercing November wind. The altitude was exactly 10,000 feet. The outside air temperature had long since plunged below 14 degrees Fahrenheit. The pilot looked at his pale flight engineer and mouthed a reality his rational brain refused to accept. The indicator wasn't lying. The massive aft air stair door, located beneath the plane's tail, was open. A man in a business suit, a thin trench coat, and light city loafers had just stepped out into the pitch-black roaring abyss over the endless forests of Washington state. Strapped tightly to his waist was a canvas bag holding $200,000. In that exact second, over the scream of the turbines and the lashing of freezing rain, the greatest, most humiliating, and most beautiful unsolved mystery in the history of American intelligence was born. Until that rainy evening in 1971, commercial aviation in the United States felt like a cozy, safe, and predictable ecosystem. It was a gentleman's club in the clouds. Passengers boarded without passing through the indignity of metal detectors. Tickets were bought with cash right at the counter, with no IDs or tedious background checks required. Stewardesses served stiff cocktails in real glass, and smoking was allowed in the cabins. The government and federal agencies were absolutely certain of their invulnerability. They believed that any potential hijacker was either a screaming political fanatic demanding a flight to Cuba or a desperate armed psychopath whom hostage negotiators could easily break on the ground. The FBI had a playbook for everything. They had algorithms, snipers, and an army of psychologists. When news of the hijacking of Flight 305 broke, the system instantly kicked into gear, baring its steel teeth. 2 military fighter interceptors secretly tailed the hijacked Boeing, hiding in the rain clouds. Powerful air defense radars continuously scanned every inch of the airspace. Dozens of heavily armed agents on the ground awaited the order to breach. The airliner had become a steel cage suspended in midair, tightly surrounded by the greatest tracking technology of the era. Breaking out of that cage was physically impossible. But the system's analysts failed to account for one thing. They were prepared to catch a criminal. Instead, they collided with a ghost.
The man who bought a $20 one-way ticket from Portland to Seattle in cash gave his name at the counter as Dan Cooper. He took a seat in the very last row. There was absolutely nothing of the typical terrorist about him. He was a middle-aged man dressed in a sharp dark suit, a flawlessly ironed white shirt, and a narrow black tie with a mother-of-pearl tie clip. He wore dark horn-rimmed sunglasses, which he never took off despite the evening hour. In his hand, he carried an ordinary, unremarkable black briefcase. His behavior was so unnervingly normal that it was far more terrifying than any shouting could be. He didn't wave a gun, didn't take hostages, didn't demand the attention of the press. He simply ordered a bourbon and soda, unhurriedly paid with a $20 bill, and politely let the young stewardess keep the change. And then, as she walked by, he handed her a neatly folded slip of paper.
The young woman, accustomed to the advances of lonely businessmen, assumed it was just another phone number and slipped the note into her uniform pocket without even unfolding it. The man took a drag of his cigarette, leaned in, and spoke in a calm, deep baritone, completely devoid of anxiety. He suggested she might want to read the note after all, adding that he had a bomb in his briefcase. The stewardess froze. Slowly, without any sudden movements, he cracked the briefcase open. Inside lay 8 red cylinders, wired intricately to a large cylindrical battery. The mechanism looked totally professional. Snapping the case shut, Cooper pushed his dark glasses back up his nose. This man's psychological profile shattered every existing template in criminology. He acted as though he were sitting through an incredibly boring corporate board meeting, the outcome of which he had known for weeks. While the plane circled over Seattle,
burning off fuel and waiting for airline executives and panicking FBI agents to scrape the ransom together on the ground, Cooper remained the calmest man within a 1,000-mile radius. He unhurriedly finished his bourbon, smoked his Raleigh cigarettes, and discussed the scenery out the window with the terrified stewardess. He even offered to pay for the entire flight crew's meals out of his own pocket. This was the signature of a man whose nervous system operated on an entirely different plane of reality.
His demands, relayed to the ground, were mathematically calibrated and contained a brilliant psychological trap. $200,000, strictly in unmarked $20 bills of mixed serial years, and 4 parachutes, 2 main back chutes and 2 reserve chest chutes. Panic set in at FBI headquarters. The demand for exactly 4 parachutes paralyzed the analytical department. Why would one man need 4 canopies? The feds came to the logical conclusion. The hijacker intended to force hostages or crew members to jump with him. This thought completely tied the government's hands. Agents on the ground could easily have slipped him dummies, canopies sewn shut or rigs with snapped lines if he had asked for just 1 set. But now, terrified that the death of an innocent stewardess or pilot would permanently stain the Bureau's reputation, the FBI didn't dare risk civilian lives. They scrambled to deliver fully functional, inspected gear from a local skydiving school. Cooper had outplayed the nation's best analysts before the game even started, weaponizing their own moral protocols against them.
The anatomy of this hijacking still leaves engineers and investigators in awe today. When the plane landed in Seattle to refuel, Cooper methodically, without any unnecessary fuss, traded 36 terrified passengers for a heavy canvas bag of cash and the parachutes. The passengers deplaned without even realizing they had been hostages the entire time. He kept only the personnel required to complete his scheme: 2 pilots, a flight engineer, and 1 stewardess. The doors slammed shut. With a roar, the heavy Boeing lifted back into the stormy night sky, setting a course toward Mexico. And this is where the hijacking escalated into a true technical masterpiece. The man in the suit dictated utterly wild, impossible flight parameters to the crew.
He ordered them to hold their altitude at exactly 10,000 feet so the cabin would remain unpressurized, allowing him to breathe normally when he opened the door without the risk of explosive decompression. He ordered the landing gear deployed mid-flight and the wing flaps lowered to exactly 15 degrees, artificially capping the jet airliner's speed at 170 knots. This was a critically low speed. The slightest piloting error under those conditions, against that kind of drag, would have instantly sent the multi-ton machine stalling into an unrecoverable tailspin. Covered in cold sweat, the pilots complied. A terrifying reality was becoming obvious. An ordinary guy off the street couldn't possibly know these numbers. This man in the dark glasses understood the aerodynamics of the Boeing 727 better than many of the engineers who built it. He knew exactly that this specific model was equipped with a unique aft air stair, a ramp that lowered directly beneath the tail. And he knew that because the engines were mounted high on the fuselage, a jumper wouldn't be sucked into the lethal turbines. In the empty, pitch-black cabin, where freezing draft was already beginning to howl, Cooper operated like clockwork. He meticulously strapped the 20-pound bag to his waist. He rigged his parachute. He politely asked the stewardess to go forward to the cockpit and pull the armored door tightly shut behind her. Left in total, absolute isolation, standing in a sharp suit on the edge of the slowly descending ramp, blasted by hurricane-force freezing winds, he stared into the impenetrable nocturnal void. The escort fighters, flying higher and behind the airliner, saw nothing through the dense cloud cover. The radar went blind. At 8:13 p.m., the man simply took a step and dissolved into the cold atmospheric dust.
The next morning marked the beginning of the most massive and aggressive search operation in the nation's history. Thousands of federal agents, military helicopters, tracker dogs, local hunters and rangers combed the dense, impenetrable, rain-soaked forests of Washington state. They gridded the territory. They looked for the crushed corpse of a skydiver. They looked for white nylon snagged in the canopy of the trees.
They looked for a bag of money or even a discarded tie. The system was absolutely certain it would find him within 24 hours. Jumping into a storm like that in the dead of night over canyon-riddled terrain, wearing no helmet, slippery loafers, and an office trench coat was tantamount to an elaborate suicide. No human could survive it. But days bled into weeks, weeks into hopeless months, and months dissolved into years. The forest kept a dead silence. A colossal state machine, capable of toppling foreign governments, was brought to its knees by a single ghost. He left investigators with nothing but a cheap clip-on tie left on a seat, 8 cigarette butts in an ashtray, and a half-empty glass of bourbon laced with fingerprints that matched absolutely no database in the world.
But there is no such thing as a perfect plan. Just when the system assumes the ghost has finally ridden off into the sunset and the case can be archived, reality throws in new, absurd, logic-defying details. Almost 9 years later, in the winter of 1980, a young boy playing on the sandy banks of the Columbia River near Tina Bar dug a strange, dense bundle out of the wet sand with his bare hands. It was 3 packets of degraded, waterlogged $20 bills. The FBI laboratory confirmed the unthinkable. The serial numbers matched the Cooper ransom perfectly. Exactly $5,800 was recovered. And this is where things get so bizarre that they still drive criminologists crazy today.
The discovery site was miles away from the drop zone calculated by supercomputers. The bills were buried in river sand and heavily damaged, but they were still tightly bound by their original rubber bands. Any chemist knows the immutable law of time. Ordinary rubber bands exposed to the elements, moisture, and temperature changes will rot, snap, and crumble to dust in a couple of years, tops. Yet these bands had miraculously survived almost a decade. How could paper money have sat there that long without the bundles losing their shape? Why did the river wash up only this minuscule fraction of the $200,000? Was it blind luck, a fluke of nature? Or had someone intentionally buried those packets in the sand just a few weeks prior to throw the investigation off the scent and make the FBI believe Cooper had drowned?
The deeper new generations of investigators dug into the meager evidence, the more paradoxical the picture became. Decades later, utilizing new technology, microscopic analysis of the black tie Cooper discarded before his jump revealed the presence of incredibly rare particles. Embedded in the fabric were microscopic traces of pure titanium, bismuth, and aluminum. In the early 1970s, only a handful of people had access to such highly specific chemical elements. They were high-level engineers working at classified defense contractors, the creators of supersonic military aircraft, or employees of top-secret chemical labs. The genius who could mentally calculate the perfect aerodynamics for jumping out of a commercial airliner was wearing the dust of the military-industrial complex's cutting-edge R&D on his clothes.
Yet this very same cold, calculating mastermind made a horrific, inexplicable human error. Out of the 4 parachutes provided to him, packing in the dim light of a swaying cabin, he chose to jump with 1 fully functional main canopy and 1 reserve. The problem was that the reserve parachute was a training dummy. It had been handed over by sheer accident by an instructor on the ground because it had been sitting in the same pile. This dummy rig was sewn completely shut with thick nylon thread. It physically could not open, even if Cooper pulled the ripcord with all his might. Any skydiver with even a modicum of experience would have noticed the trap immediately just by feeling the density of the pack. Did this brilliant engineer step into a nighttime thunderstorm with a useless piece of fabric strapped to his chest out of stupid ignorance and panic? Or was he so fanatically confident in his main chute that he didn't even bother checking his backup before stepping into the abyss? That mistake shatters the sleek image of the perfect criminal, reducing him from a demigod to a vulnerable, fallible human being.
The official investigation
codenamed Norjack, was quietly and unceremoniously suspended after 45 years. The Bureau conceded its ultimate defeat in the face of the unknown. The vast majority of the money never, under any circumstances, resurfaced in circulation. Not a single serial number issued to Cooper ever passed through a bank, a casino, or a store anywhere in the world. A man with no face, no name, and no past had taught the state apparatus a brutal, highly public lesson in vulnerability. He engineered a scheme that was impossible to predict or stop. But he forgot that blind nature, gravity, and a freezing night storm do not bow to even the most brilliant mathematical calculations.
The system learned its lesson and responded with an iron fist. After that night, the rules of the game changed forever. Emergency retrofits were ordered for all commercial Boeings worldwide, installing special exterior aerodynamic locks. They were unofficially dubbed the Cooper vane. Under the pressure of oncoming air, this piece of metal permanently locked the aft air stair, making it absolutely impossible to open the door mid-flight. Airports introduced metal detectors, X-ray machines, and degrading physical searches. A new paranoid era of total aviation surveillance had begun. The industry adapted, patching the chink in its armor, but it could never find psychological closure. The ghost had won.
And now, the ultimate question. The one the greatest minds in law enforcement could never logically answer. Do you actually believe that this exceedingly polite man with titanium dust on his tie really made a stupid mistake with a dummy parachute and didn't survive the plunge into the freezing storm, vanishing forever into the swamps of Washington? Or was that bizarre discovery of rotting cash and perfectly intact rubber bands on the riverbank his final brilliantly orchestrated act, a masterpiece designed to convince the FBI of his inevitable death, allowing him to quietly dissolve into the crowd forever?